My name is Jackson. My life has never been easy. I grew up in the foster care system, moving from one family to another until I found adoptive parents with whom I was able to stay until I was an adult. When I turned 18, I was still living with my adoptive parents, trying to find my place in this world. It was during this time that I began taking courses at a community college where I met her, Julia. She wasn't just beautiful, her intelligence and charm immediately struck me. Julia stood out from all the girls I'd ever met, and I was immediately captivated by her presence. Our relationship progressed rapidly. We began dating, and soon our secret intimate encounters became regular. We were young and reckless without thinking about the consequences. A year and a half into our relationship, Julia became pregnant. Our families, being Christian and extremely traditional, insisted that we get married as soon as possible. After our wedding, our lives began to change. Julia and I settled into a small apartment, trying to create a comfortable home for our growing family. Our first child, a daughter, was born shortly after our wedding, and it was both a joy and a huge responsibility. We were both young and inexperienced, but we tried our best to be good parents. I began looking for a job to provide for our family, but due to my inconsistent parenting experience and lack of stability in my life, I found that I could not hold down one job for more than a year. It was like torture trying to focus on one thing day after day without a clear goal and direction. Soon Julia became pregnant again, and our first child was only 4 months old. We urgently needed money to support our family. My search for work became increasingly desperate. I tried different professions, but none lasted long. We began to experience financial difficulties, and this put pressure on our relationship. Our sex life began to suffer too. The constant stress and dissatisfaction with the situation affected our relationship. I became less attentive and caring, often taking my frustrations out on Julia without realizing it. Julia, in turn, felt increasingly lonely and unhappy. However, we tried to support each other despite all the difficulties. Julia stayed home with the children while I tried to find a stable job. Her support and patience were a source of strength for me. We went through all the trials together, hoping that everything would work out eventually. But over time, our problems became more and more obvious. Julia began to complain about feeling lonely and lost connection between us. She felt that we no longer communicated as we used to, and this made her unhappy. I, immersed in my own problems, was not always able to understand and support her. Our families also noticed the strain in our relationship. My adoptive parents invited Julia to spend some time with them to rest and gain strength. I agreed, hoping it would help her feel better. They took her out to eat, watched movies, and played games, trying to take her mind off her problems. It was then that something happened that would change our lives forever. One day my foster mother took me out to dinner and told me some devastating news. It turned out that after one of the nights Julia stayed with them, she had been molesting my foster father. This news devastated me, and I didn't know what to do next. After my foster mother told me what Julia had done, I was stunned and devastated. Not knowing what to do, I returned home. Julia already knew that I'd been told about her infidelity. She looked terrible. Her eyes were red from crying. Her face was pale. Her hands were shaking. She begged me to listen to her, to give her a chance to explain. "I don't know how this happened," she sobbed. "It was a moment of madness. I felt so alone and lost. Please forgive me. I love you and I am willing to do anything to fix this." But I couldn't hear her. A storm was raging inside me. I couldn't believe that the woman I loved and wanted to build a future with had betrayed me like this. I couldn't stay in the same house with her, so I decided to go to my foster parents, leaving the children with her so I could have time to think. The 5 weeks I spent with my foster parents were the longest and hardest of my life. Julia called every day, begging me to come back. She promised to change, asked for another chance. She talked about how much she missed me and how she wanted to fix her mistakes. My foster mother tried to support me too. She explained that people make mistakes and that maybe we could get through this together. She reminded me how much we loved each other and how important it was to keep the family together for the sake of the children. but every word she said cut into my heart, reminding me of Julia's betrayal. In the end, I decided to give our family another chance. We started seeing a counselor, on to a psychologist to try to restore our relationship. At first, it seemed possible. We talked about our feelings, tried to be honest with each other. Julia tried her best to show me that she had changed, but despite all our efforts, the wound caused by the betrayal did not heal. I could not forget. I could not forgive. Every touch, every word she said reminded me of the betrayal. We argued more and more often, blaming each other for our problems. Julia said that she felt guilty every day and that she would never be able to atone for the pain she had caused me. Our relationship began to crumble again. Julia became more and more unhappy, and I became more and more distant. We began to live like neighbors and not as husband and wife. Our intimate life practically disappeared. I could no longer trust her, and she felt rejected and unhappy. It was a fall of our hopes, our dreams, and our love. Everything we had built together was crumbling before our eyes, and I knew that we couldn't continue like this. We were on the edge of an abyss, and one wrong step could lead us to complete destruction. One evening, returning home after a long day at work, I noticed that the atmosphere in the house had changed. Julia was nervous and restless, trying to avoid eye contact. The children were already asleep, and the house was plunged into a strange silence. I decided to talk to her, hoping to find out what was going on. "Julia, what happened?" I asked, sitting down opposite her on the sofa. She hesitated, looked at me, then lowered her eyes. "Nothing. Everything is fine," she answered uncertainly. I didn't believe her. "You're hiding something. Please tell me the truth." Julia was silent for a long time, then took a deep breath and finally confessed. "I took money from our joint account. I needed money, and I didn't know what else to do." I couldn't believe my ears. "How much did you take?" I asked, anger rising in me. "Everything," she whispered. "I took all the money." My head was spinning. We had been saving this money for our children's future, for emergencies. I couldn't believe she could do this. "What did you do with the money?" I demanded. She hesitated again, then said, "I gave it to David." David was an old acquaintance of hers, a man who was constantly getting into trouble and needed money. I had always suspected something between them, but I had no proof. Now it was all clear. "You gave our money to that drug addict?" My voice shook with rage. "How could you do this to us?" Julia began to cry. "I didn't know what to do. He threatened me, said that if I didn't help him, he would hurt us." I couldn't believe her words. This was betrayal of the highest level. Not only had she cheated on me, but she had stolen our money to help some drug addict. My heart was breaking into pieces. "You should have come to me, talked to me," I said, trying to contain my emotions. "But instead, you went behind his back and betrayed me. You betrayed our family." Julia continued to cry, but I could no longer comfort her. My trust in her was completely shattered. I knew we couldn't get through this. Our family was shattered, and I didn't know how to pick up the pieces. I stayed with my foster parents, trying to figure out what to do next. Julia took care of the kids while I was gone, which helped clear my head. I was separated from my family for 5 weeks, allowing Julia to understand the consequences of her actions. She called me every day, begging for forgiveness and expressing her love and regret. The court awarded me full custody of the children, as Julia was found guilty of infidelity and had no home or income. She continued to have children with other men, but never found stability. I learned my lesson. Do not engage in unprotected sex, and do not marry hastily. Now Julia only sees the children a few times a year, paying child support. Despite all the trials, I am glad that I was able to protect my children and give them a stable life. My story is a warning about the importance of thinking about the consequences of your actions and not rushing into important decisions.